I get so many people asking me what my biggest tips are for better mental health that I decided to make a video about it. So here today are my 5 foundations of better mental health. Get settled and let's talk about mental health. Hello, I'm Jeremy Godwin, and today I'm talking about 5 foundations of better mental health and well-being. And if you stick around to the end, I'll be sharing a bonus point, which is the single biggest thing that you can do to improve your mental health and well-being. So let's jump straight in, beginning with priorities. Know what matters most to you in life and focus on that. Because the thing is that the majority of the stuff that affects us on a day-to-day basis is not going to matter in 12 weeks, let alone 12 months, and certainly not in 12 years' time. The majority of things that we have emotional reactions to or that we find challenging are just blips on the radar. And so when you instead focus on what genuinely matters most to you in life. For example, the people that you care about the most, doing work that feels fulfilling and meaningful, or whatever it is for you. If you focus on that stuff, if you know it and focus on it, you can then choose to let everything else just be water off a duck's back. That doesn't mean that stuff won't affect you, but what it means is that you are able to pull yourself back, even if it's not immediate. Sometimes it might take a few hours or the next day, but you can pull yourself back and position things in your mind as being less of a concern than you might initially think that they actually are. This is what helps you to grow, because it challenges you to focus on what really matters rather than getting caught up in the day-to-day drama that actually doesn't matter. And it also challenges you to try new things, because if you're focused on your priorities, then you're going to be more focused on going after them and making them absolutely as successful as possible. And speaking of, that brings me to my next point: accept mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable in life. You will drop the ball on some things, and it's not about not making mistakes, because nobody is perfect and it is physically impossible not to make a mistake. In fact, the majority of the things that we learn as human beings, we learn from making mistakes. However, this is about saying, okay, you can either choose to see mistakes as a failure, which is something that I have talked about before in the podcast in episode 84, or you can choose to see it as an opportunity to grow. And I talked about mistakes all the way back in episode 2 of the podcast, because it's kind of a fundamental thing. And the podcast started because I made a mistake at work and my perspective changed on things as a result. Sometimes mistakes are actually opportunities hidden. So it's about looking at what is the opportunity to learn from whatever the mistake is, and actually then learning from it and making the changes that you need to do so that you can actually grow. When you inevitably trip up, and you will, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, learn the lessons that you need to learn, and keep on moving forward. It doesn't matter how many times you fall, it matters how many times you get back up. So my next point is self-care. And I talk about self-care a lot here and on the podcast. In fact, episode 6 was all about self-care, and you can find that linked in the description below. The thing about self-care is that sometimes we think that it's indulgent or that we should be doing things that are more important. Nothing is more important than self-care. If you aren't going to look after yourself, who is going to? And so the piece here is about saying, okay, how do you have healthy self-care practices that you put into place on a daily basis to look after your health and well-being, mental, physical, and spiritual, and also to set yourself up for the best possible chance of success. Self-care is like recharging your phone. If you just keep using it without recharging the battery, it will run out of juice. The same thing happens for you. So if that means that you need to take 20 minutes to go read a book so that you can rest and recharge, go sit out in the sun for a little bit, safely please, make sure you use sunscreen, sit out in the sun and eat your lunch, or whatever it might be, make sure that you make self-care an absolute priority. Because again, if you don't, who will? And that brings me to my next point. Choose your response to things. Your response is your choice. Look, let's be honest, there's a lot of not so great stuff that happens in life, and quite often we can have emotional reactions to it. You can either choose to lean into that emotional reaction, and quite often that causes a whole bunch of mess if you just react without thought, it's purely based on feeling, Or you can take your time to process it and then respond in a much more thoughtful way. And so this piece about recognizing that you have the power to choose your response is probably one of the most powerful things about understanding better mental health and well-being. Because what it does is it helps you to think about how you're actually going to take ownership of the things that happen around you and consider how you're going to respond in a more thoughtful way. There's a quote by Dr. Viktor Frankl that I use quite a fair bit in my work that I'd like to share. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. You are the one that's in control of your responses. Nobody can make you do or say anything. And it might not always seem like you're in control, but you are. Recognizing that fact is fundamental for your personal growth and overall well-being. Speaking of, my next point is accept that you can only control yourself. This is about accepting the things that are outside of your control, because all you have any direct control over is yourself in terms of your words, your actions, and your feelings. And that's more specifically around what you choose to do with your feelings. We spend so much time worried about the things that are so far out of our control, like situations and other people, that we end up making ourselves get into situations that we just don't need to. We end up making life a lot more stressful for ourselves because we're worried about this person said that and they should have said this, or this situation has happened and I'm not happy about it. All you can control is what you choose to do, say, and feel. And so when you embrace that fact, what it actually does is it helps you to let go of trying to control things and control other people. And it also makes things a lot easier for yourself because you understand and accept that the only way to process that stuff and the only way to grow is to accept the things that are outside of your control and make your peace with it so that you can then focus on what you can control, because you're always in control of your response. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't feel annoyed or frustrated or angry or hurt or whatever that emotion might be, but it means that you can more easily accept those emotions, process them, and then release them. And by doing that, the more frequently you do that, the more you will grow. And that brings me to my bonus point, which is choose growth. Because everything that happens in life is an opportunity to grow, which I talked about back in episode 37 of the podcast. In all things, choose growth. And I'm sharing this one because if we don't grow, then we stagnate. And when you stagnate, you end up making things far worse for yourself. Life is change. There's nothing we can do about that. Things will not stay the same. And so if you try to resist growth, or you try just to keep things the way that they are, you will create difficulty for yourself, you will potentially create misery, and you will create conflict. So rather than letting those things happen, choose growth. Choose to be the best version of yourself possible every single day, and to take small steps every day towards being even more of the person that you want to be. Be someone who chooses to do no harm, who is kind, and who gives more than they take. And that's for yourself as well as for other people. And so when you do those things, you begin to put growth at the front and center of everything that you do. And when you do that, that's when you start to achieve and feel better about yourself, greater well-being, better mental health, and a more satisfying, rich, and fulfilling life. The choice is yours, as it is with all things related to your well-being. So the question is, what choice will you make today? And to close out, I would actually like to share a little bit more of that quote from Dr. Viktor Frankl, because it didn't actually end at the quote that I gave you just before. There's a touch more that I'd like you to think about and reflect on. Here's the full quote. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That's it for this week's episode. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me a growth emoji in the comments because, hey, growth for the win. Now, go and watch this video for more good stuff about better mental health, and click here to subscribe to my channel for weekly Let's Talk About Mental Health TV videos. Plus, listen to the Let's Talk About Mental Health podcast every Sunday on your favourite podcast platform. Find links in the description. Thanks for joining me today. Take care and talk to you next time.